What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show here on Sherdog.com. And today I'm looking ahead to UFC 275. You know, normally I'm here looking at Bellator, I'm looking at the PFL, but none of those big events this weekend. We'll be back next weekend with those. But today I want to look at a couple of fights, and the two big fights at UFC 275. The lads will have the breakdown of the full card up on Sherdog. Sheehan and Duffy do a great job of breaking all that down, so I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to step on their toes. I want to talk a little bit about the top two fights, but I also want to talk about like the divisions and maybe the similarities between the 125 pound division that could become a thing in a while, and what we have at 205 pounds right now, obviously with the main event being the 205 pound title between Glover Teixeira and Jiri Prochazka, with the co-main event being the 125 pound title in the women's side of the sport on the line as Valentina Shevchenko takes on Taila Santos. This is obviously over in Singapore next Saturday. I believe it's on at the normal time for the US viewers, which is very unfortunate for me because I thought it'd be on at normal time for me, but and they never do me any favours, do they? Although the card last weekend I thought was clashing with real sports over here, so I won't give out too much, but yeah, it's normal time I believe this weekend, and you can check on Sherdog.com and I'm sure other places as well to find out all you need to go and watch it. But let's talk about the divisions first, and then I'll talk about the fights and the fighters themselves in the fights a little bit. So what we have in the 205 pound division at the moment is kind of the space eradicated by Jon Jones, if you want to put it that way. And for a long time, we had the division where Jon Jones was a part of it even when he wasn't a part of it. Like a similar sort of things happened with McGregor at 145 that time, you know, when he went up to 155 and, you know, he fought Diaz and he was out and things like that, where everyone was talking about him holding up the division. And even if Jon Jones hadn't the same sort of chat about him, I think the fact that he was in the division while out with USADA, or while, you know, not fighting, or while talking about going to heavyweight or whatever it might have been, the conversation was always around him, like at 145 when the conversation was always around McGregor, or, you know, if it's, you know, whoever it might be at the very top of the division, especially if it's a massive name, or especially if it is a long reigning champion like Jones or like Shevchenko, when we talk about the women's 125 pound division. But then Jones went, and division has kind of opened up a bit now, and the same thing happened. You know, this is an age-old story, I suppose, in the UFC. It happened with GSP when he went, and we had the Johnny Hendricks, Robbie Lawler, and then Wonderboy and Woodley and all of that. Straight after that, it opened up for the other people in the division, and, you know, when Anderson Silva left as well, or got beaten even by Chris Weidman, and we do Rockhold and, you know, Bisping and Whitaker and Adesanya and all of that. So these divisions do open up when someone leaves, and I think that's what we've had here. And instead of having maybe title fights where even if there's a really good guy coming up, say someone like Jiri Prochazka, you're going to probably favour Jon Jones, and most people will be favouring Jon Jones. And even if it's a close fight, say like the fights between Jon Jones and Thiago Santos, and who's the other guy, Dominic Reyes as well in his last couple of fights, it's still kind of written off a little bit, or even coming into the fights, they might be written off. Even the Gustafsson fight, you know, the first fight, it didn't do that many pay-per-view buys because a lot of people didn't expect Gustafsson maybe to do much to him. A lot of people who weren't in the know anyway. But now, you know, Glover against Blachowicz in the last fight, or even Blachowicz against Adesanya as well, there was a favourite. People thought, knew who they thought might win. And I would say probably in both of those fights, maybe I'm not, I don't have the betting lines in front of me now at the moment, but I would say the underdog in both of those one, if I'm not mistaken, maybe I'm wrong now, but they were both close fights anyway. And we come into it again here now in Glover, and we have him against Prochazka, and it's another one of those. I think, like, I'd probably favour Prochazka. I think other people would as well, and as I said, we'll get to that in a second. But there is that unknown. There is that kind of, you know, the divide that has been left by Jon Jones, and it's no longer Jon Jones being, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the division, and then fighting 1 again, and then fighting 3 again, and then fighting 4. It's not that. So that, for the division, I think, is good. Now, for the division overall not to have Jon Jones, is it good? Or for, we'll get to Shevchenko in a second, to not have a Shevchenko, to not have a McGregor, to not have a GSP? And, you know, McGregor is obviously, he wasn't the long reigning, but he was the guy in the division that they're all calling now. You could say the same maybe even for Habib, even though he wasn't long reigning either. But that division has really kind of got a G up because of the void left by Jones. And even guys say like an Anthony Smith and like Glover Teixeira, who's champion now, who had lost to Jon Jones, are able to get another runner. And even if they weren't fighting great before that, the fact that Jones is kind of gone, I think mentally gives them something that goes, well, Jon Jones is probably going to beat me, yes, but what about the rest of them? Maybe not so much. And now the reason I'm saying this, and maybe the correlation between that and 125 pounds, is what if the same thing happens with Valentina Shevchenko? What if she goes? What if she relinquishes her title at 125 pounds, goes up and fights? Whether it's Juliana Pena or whether it is Amanda Nunes for the title. Fighting Amanda Nunes again. It would leave that void for maybe some other people to get a go in that division, if you want to put it that way, or to get a go as champion. I know I was talking, I do my state of the UFC over in Severe, and you can listen to that now for free over in our RSS feed there with Spencer Kite 2 weeks ago, or 10 days ago even. We were kind of talking about that division and talking about how it's kind of improving a little bit. And you have the likes of Manon Fiorot, Viviane Araujo. I think a lot of her, I think she's very good. With Taila Santos fighting this weekend, but you also have some good people coming through, like Casey O'Neill is a very good prospect. Tracy Cortez, I thought she fought very well a couple of weeks ago. And let's say if you didn't have Shevchenko at the top of that division, all of those people, maybe someone will be able to come and shock someone. Let's say Taila Santos was the champion now. Look, like if you had Jessica Andrade against Taila Santos, that's Jessica Andrade should probably be favourite for that fight. If you had Jennifer Maia going up against her, maybe again, if you had people, like Cynthia Calvillo making a run, or like Casey O'Neill coming up, or like Tracy Cortez, it opens up for all of them. Whereas while Valentina Shevchenko is there, the division is very much closed for all of those people, and it very much from their point of view, I'm sure they think they can win these fights. But from the fans' point of view, from the media members' point of view, we're kind of talking about these fights in a way, we kind of have to talk about it because it's a title fight, but there's not that much competition in it. We don't think there will be anyway. Now, Taila Santos come out and win this weekend. Let's be honest there, we've seen it happen before. Look what Juliana Pena did to Amanda Nunes. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility. This is mixed martial arts. But that is being the general after the battle, as the great Artem Lobov once said. We talk about MMA beforehand, we predicted, and not just that we predicted. This is a pay-per-view over in the States. People have to buy this. So forget about the main event for a second. But if you're buying it for the co-main event, or if you're looking at it, maybe I want 2 great title fights before I'm going to put my 70 quid out there and pay for it. And you look at this and think, well, first of all, who is Taila Santos? She hasn't had that many fights in the UFC. She isn't on some great, historic run or anything like that. For the outsiders, now I think people in the know she's a good fighter. And as I said, I will talk about that more in a second. But does she seem going into the fight like someone who is worth the money to pay for if you're an American viewer who has to pay for a pay-per-view? I would say most people would say no. Now, having said that, it might be a great fight and she might win, but we're talking about the decisions made beforehand. And that is, while it's great to have a domineering fighter at the very top, and I love watching Valentina Shevchenko fight, I'll watch her fight number 1 to 15. I'm looking at in the rankings here in front of me, one after the other, and I'd be happy to do it because she's such a great fighter, and I'm happy to see her beat everyone going along, and I'm happy to see someone beat her maybe as well, because if someone beats her, they're a good fighter. The same with Demetrius Johnson, the same with Jon Jones, the same with Anderson Silva, whoever it might be. But there is no denying that when they vacate that position, it opens up it opens up to everyone else. It really, really does. And you could see a few different people holding titles and a few different people becoming the champion or challenging for the title or coming back to challenge for the title that they once challenged for before, when the unbeatable person at the very top is kind of gone and has vacated that position. So I think that is something to look for in these two divisions going forward. And if the 125 pound division does turn into that, I actually think it's a division, and I wouldn't have said this probably a year ago or something, but I think it's a division that could prosper and a division that could look better than it is right now. And it's weird to say that the best fighter by far in the division is kind of holding it back a bit, but it feels like it is, and it's not. None of that is her fault. It's her fault because she's so good. But you get what I mean. Look at Jon Jones. It was his fault because he was so good, but now he's gone. Everyone kind of beat each other or have the hope of beating each other or have the fans hope that one person can win the fight. Like, Prochazka versus Teixeira, let's get into it. Like, who will win the fight straight up? I'm not sure. I'm honestly, I'm really, really not sure. And let's maybe break it down a little bit, because I'm a big fan of this fight. There's probably no one covering MMA who is a bigger fan of Glover Teixeira, I think, or a bigger advocate of his skill sets. I think he is probably the most underrated wrestler ever we've seen in MMA. And I mean, when I say that now, I absolutely mean that. This guy has taken down some of the biggest and best. He is really smart with his takedowns. He times them really, really well. And not just times them in terms of, you know, dips down and gets under and times it well like that. He times it well in the round. He times it well in the fight. He times it well in the kind of the running of the fight. And I don't think he's honestly given enough credit for that, because when people, maybe not as much anymore, but when people were analysing Glover Teixeira, and now not, you know, the good analysts did it all, but in general, I think a lot of people talked about him as, oh, you know, he's a striker, he needs to keep it on the feet, you know, he's a knockout power and a good boxer and things like that. And, you know, they probably had in, and he can wrestle too, you know, he's a bit of jiu-jitsu. But I actually think as like an all-rounded wrestle boxer, if you want to put it that way, not in the Tyron Woodley or Josh Koscheck sense of the word maybe, but I think he's very, very good, and he's really, really underrated. And talking about the fight this week, my partner over in Severe May, Graham McDonald, we were kind of discussing our discussions on Glover Teixeira throughout the years and how smart he is at doing certain things, and not just the takedown in the fight, but he'll make it difficult for you, know. He get that bald 5 a.m. shadow in his hair and like stick it into your face when the fight's on the ground and make it dirty and make you tired, but while also kind of biding his time. Like, if you look at Glover over like that Prochazka fight, Graham made a great point to me on the podcast. He broke Jan Blachowicz. Like, he broke a guy who broke Adesanya, if you want to put it that way. You know, he broke a guy who's been fighting on probably one of the, without a shadow of a doubt, I would say, the toughest local scene, if you want to put it like that, over in Poland, and then came up in the UFC and had tough fights, lost and won and stuff like that, and he broke that guy. You know, he choked out Taila Santos, he broke Anthony Smith as well, and then we can talk about all his fights before that down through the years. Beat Cannonier, beat Rashad Evans, beat Ryan Bader, the double champion over in Bellator, and even going back to Rampage Jackson and his early fights. Like, Glover has been fighting since God was a boy, back in 2002. What is it? What have we now? 20 years. Been fighting for 20 years. You know, we all, well, maybe we don't all remember. People should remember he had problems getting into the country. He was training with Chuck Liddell, but then he went home to Brazil and couldn't get back because of visa issues and different things like that. It's been a real tough road for Glover Teixeira, and I think all of that has added in and has shown what fighter he has become today, because he's become a wonderful fighter and a smart fighter and a very, very tough and hard to beat fighter as well. And coming in here against Jiri Prochazka, I think a lot of people will probably rule him out. I think a lot of people will. I think a lot of people will look at Jiri Prochazka and say, like, oh, this is the new up-and-coming guy. This is the next flavour of the month, and this old guy is going to get beaten by him. And you know what? Look, I don't know who will win the fight. I'm just looking at the odds here. Jiri Prochazka is almost a 2-1 favourite, and obviously we'll talk about it more in the betting show. But that just shows you, Glover Teixeira around plus 170 here at the moment, as I record this early in the week for that fight. So you can tell already that people are picking his opponent. He is the champion. He's the guy who's done all this to earn and earned all of this, and he's still in that position where he is the underdog. Now, maybe that's fair, maybe it's not, but still, that is the position we're talking about right now at the moment. And I just feel like maybe we need to show a little bit more respect to Glover Teixeira. But having said that as well, Jiri Prochazka is a fantastic fighter. He is a brilliant fighter, and I want to talk about this matchup in a second, because it's a really fascinating matchup to me. But if you look at Prochazka and his record over the last few years, a lot of people watching him before me over in Risen and those cards. Like, I'm in a part of the world now where I managed to watch Cage Warriors, and I watched some of obviously the KSW and the UFC and the PFL. But Risen is just one for me recently, and not a lot of the hardcores listening to this will probably say, "Well, what are you doing?" But I've watched obviously some Risen, but it's just such a bad time for me, and I watch so much more MMA. Risen is the thing I can't just making myself get into now because my life has already been ruined enough by MMA, as anyone watching this video on this side of the world will probably know. So I didn't see that come up, but I saw guys like Rebecca Aitman talking about him, and I watched some of these fights, obviously, and the guys that he's beaten that have kind of made their way from Rizin maybe, or made their way to Rizin at the time, is brilliant. Like, a few of them. Maldonado, obviously, probably a little bit past the prime at that time, 2019. King Mohamed Lawal maybe as well, but he beat Bruno Capiloza, and anyone who listens to any of my Sheehan shows knows how high I am on Bruno Capiloza. I think this guy is one of the best heavyweights in the world. He beat Karl Albrechtsen, who's a very, very, very good fighter. Beat Vadim Nimkov, who a lot of people could argue right now, with Jon Jones out of the way, is the best 205 pounder in the world, and he didn't just beat him. I spoke about Glover breaking people. He broke Nimkov. Nimkov literally, I watched that fight the other day, he could not get up. You know, I think it was a 10-minute first round. He could not get up. He could not get up. It says a TKO retirement here on Sherdog, and that is exactly what it was. He retired. He beat him into retirement. And that's a part of the game, and it's a very interesting one, because we'll talk about the breakdown of it. But that's a part of the game with Jiri Prochazka. I think maybe people overlook a bit. He has that toughness too, and he's come through those tough fights against those tough people, and that is a part of his game that makes a flashy, we call him over here in Ireland, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, it's a fancy Dan type of fighter, a special fighter when he has that toughness about him as well. It makes him an absolutely special fighter. And look, is he as tough as Glover Teixeira? I'm not going to say that. I wouldn't say so. But he's also no shrinking violet, and he's not going to go in there and just be beaten if Glover makes it a tough man's fight, if you want to put it that way. But as I said, let's talk about that in 1 second. I want to just quickly about Prochazka, the way I see him as a fighter. You know, you see the lads up behind me on the wall here, Wonderboy and Anderson and MVP, and maybe not so much Kimbo, but those guys are loose, languid, wild fighters on the outside. It's to some extent differently between them, but that's what he is. He is a high volume, I was going to say elusive there, not so much elusive. He does get hit an awful lot, but he moves an awful lot. He gives a lot of different angles to his shots. You don't know what's coming, the variety. It could be a low kick to the calf, it could be a kick to the top of the leg, it could be a kick to the body, it could be a wheel kick, it could be a punch to the body, it could be a punch to the head with the left, the right hand, it could be a hook, it could be a straight, it could be a southpaw hook, it could be an orthodox hook, it could be it could be anything with Prochazka, and he moves so well offensively. Now defensively, sometimes he stands there and he's welcome to get hit. Like Volkan Ozdemir, I went back and watched that fight. He almost knocked him out. He was very, very, very close to knocking him out. But the thing with Prochazka as well is that if you think about that way he fights, where he moves non-stop on his feet, non-stop with his hands, non-stop with offense as well as movement, he's carrying 205 pounds on his back, or maybe 220 pounds once he gets into the cage after maybe cutting a bit down. It's grand to see Demetrius Johnson maybe doing that, or Dominic Cruz, or even people up at 170, or maybe even 185, but not even 185 I would say. But seeing a 205 pounder doing that, it's very, very tough. So I think for Prochazka, the first 2 rounds are of the utmost importance here, and getting a finish in the first 2 rounds are of the utmost importance. But I will say it again, he has proven that toughness, and he is a tough guy as well, so I wouldn't rule him out over that. But I think his best chance of winning this fight is in the first 2 rounds, and Glover Teixeira will know that. And when we talk about the matchup, I think we need to talk about Glover Teixeira getting through those first 2 rounds. I said earlier on about picking the timing for his wrestling. Pick it at the right time. Get your takedowns at the right time. Win the fight when you need it to be won. If he doesn't take too much damage through 2 rounds, if he's won one of the rounds, great. But even if he's lost 2 of the rounds, and Prochazka has, put out a serious amount of his own cardio and used a serious amount of his own petrol tank, I think Glover Teixeira will be quite happy with that. I think he'll be quite happy with that position, and I think he will attempt to take the fight from there and use what makes him great, that grit, that determination, and that skill as well. I also, look, I said I wouldn't rule out Prochazka late because he's a tough guy. I also wouldn't rule out Glover early, because I said Prochazka leaves himself very open. And Glover can hit. You know, I talked about Glover being an underrated wrestler. Don't get me wrong, this guy can strike as well. And this guy, you know, you know what I mean. He is a very good striker and a very hard striker. And if like Volkan Ozdemir is probably like Teixeira is probably like a way better version of Volkan Ozdemir. Ozdemir took him down, and he hit him. If Glover can hit him and take him down as well, it could be a tough night and a very, very tough night for Jiri Prochazka. Now, Prochazka got up from the takedowns. He didn't get knocked out by the shots as well. Let me say that. But it's Glover Teixeira you're fighting here, not Volkan Ozdemir as well. So it's a very intriguing fight. I feel like, you know, maybe my prediction is probably Prochazka within the first 3 rounds. But I feel like I broke down all the integers of the way this fight could go, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward. I'm really, really looking forward to seeing it. The co-main event, I'm probably not as much looking forward to this one as the main event, but look, I think there are ways that Taila Santos can get to Valentina Shevchenko. Like, if you look at her record, she's a lot of finishes for someone in the women's 125 pound division. 13 of her 19 fights have been finishes. Surprisingly enough, only 3 submissions. You know, she is very good on the ground, but 10 knockouts as well. And you know, sometimes you might think of her because of a few fights recently. Obviously, the last fight against Joanne Wood, she got the rear naked choke. And we've seen her on the ground against Molly McCann, where she dominated there, and Roxanne Modafferi, where she took her down there. Maybe you expect a few more submissions than she is. Obviously, she has very, very good jiu-jitsu, but I actually haven't gone back and watched her without looking at the record or anything like that. I like her just straight boxing down the middle, as a finishing method, maybe not necessarily in this fight, but as a possible finishing method. You know, she throws hard and she throws nice long punches. You know, she's 5'5" compared to Valentina Shevchenko's 5'5" as well, so she won't be outsized, and she's probably a longer, rangier fighter than Valentina Shevchenko, just in the way that she fights. So maybe that could be one advantage in terms of the length and the long shots she does throw, especially when she pushes someone against the cage. Now, if you're talking about the takedowns, if you're talking about the jiu-jitsu, I think getting Valentina Shevchenko down is very tough. We saw in the Mara Romero-Borella fight that she can be out-strengthened against the cage. She can be beaten in the wrestling department, and she can be beaten on the ground. And I think if Borella can do that to her, Borella even can do that to her. I definitely think Shevchenko can. You know, Shevchenko, you know, she's a Muay Thai specialist, but the Thai clinch is a massive part of her game. She's great trips there, so strong against the cage, really good takedown defense, and it's going to be very hard to take her down, and I don't think Santos will, honestly, and if she does, it won't be numerous times, so she needs to make the best of it, in my opinion. That would lead to Santos needing to get the fight out of there on the feet, which is probably less of a viable out. But as I said, those straight shots down the middle are to me her best way to do it. Now, they're her best way to do it against anyone. Against Shevchenko, are they a good way to do it? Probably. Let's be honest, probably not. Like, I've said this numerous times in numerous fights about Valentina Shevchenko, but I go and watch her opponent. I go and watch a few of her fights, and I kind of see the good things. Maybe someone like a Santos, or who was she fighting recently? Jessica Andrade, or Kaylin Chukagian, or Jessica I might do, or Liz Carmouche, whoever it might be. I go and see the good things they do, and maybe openings that Valentina could get to do a show like this, or whatever other shows I'm talking about them in, or the betting show, and that's grand. And I kind of get my dossier and my brain about those fighters, and then I go and watch a few Shevchenko fights, and I'm thinking like, oh, well, that was kind of pointless. Why would I bother doing that? Shevchenko is just better. And it's the one thing that stands out. And I think anyone, just go and do this. Watch a few Taila Santos fights, right? And just watch a round, even watch 2 or 3 minutes of a fight. Watch her against the cage. Watch her wrestling, and watch her striking. And then go and watch a bit of Shevchenko. And look at the difference in speed. Look at the difference in athleticism. Look at the difference in power that she throws with, and the cleanliness of her shots. It's like day and night, you know? And it's not just Taila Santos. It is everyone in that division. And that's what I talked about earlier. That division, everyone else might be a little bit even, or everyone else could beat everyone else. But Valentina Shevchenko is... is unbeatable. Unbeatable is a weird word. Unbeatable is a weird word. Now, she will be beaten at some stage if she stays in that division. She will be beaten at some stage. It might be Taila Santos. It might be, it might be Jessica Andrade or 2, 3, or 4 or 5, but it might be Casey O'Neill, or it might be Tracy Cortez, or it might be that fighter that debuts 2 weeks ago and in 5 years' time or 3 years' time is 10-0 and is better than Valentina Shevchenko. But there will be someone. There will be someone, and she will be beaten if she stays in that division, or if anyone stays in any division, because MMA moves. MMA is not a sport that sits still. It's not, soccer or NFL or baseball or anything like that. It's not a sport that's been around for 100 years, especially in this division at this level. And Valentina Shevchenko is like someone who's been around for 100 years compared to everyone else at the moment. But that will change too. Will it be this weekend? I don't think so. And obviously I'll have more of my picks and everything like that for this fight and for all the rest of the fights over on the betting show. But yeah, all in all, I just wanted to kind of make those comparisons maybe between the two divisions and talk a little bit about those two fights. I will leave it there. Thank you very much. If you haven't seen the rest of my shows on Sherdog.com, check them out on our YouTube page on Sherdog.com, and as well on Spotify and anywhere you get your podcast apps. Look for the Sherdog Radio Network and you'll find them there with all the other beautiful Sherdog podcasts. Click the subscribe button, click the like, give it a 5-star review over on Spotify and everywhere else as well. Alright, I will leave it there. My name is Sean Sheehan for Sherdog.com. I'll see you all next time.